Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get ready to start tonight's show in a minute. I just need to let everybody know that tonight's show is getting started. Good evening, Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare. Glad to see you here. I'm going to get started with tonight's show. Now, tonight's show, I'm going to be asking one critical question: faith or fear? Which one do you have? Now, in the aftermath of this pandemic that's going on right now, there are a lot of people who are afraid. And this is not the time to give in to fear, because if you give in to fear, you are definitely going to do things that you're going to regret. So, this is the time to have faith in the Most High living God and trust in Him. And the reason why you want to trust in Him is because He is the only one who can bring us out of this crisis, and we have to trust in Him to deliver us from this crisis. So I want to talk a lot about fear, because that's what I see being a big problem with this whole pandemic that's going on. Is there's a lot of fear out here, and a lot of that fear, I believe, is deliberately being promoted in public, because a lot of people are looking to capitalize on that fear. But fear is never a good thing to try to stir up, because when you get people fearful, what happens is, instead of them thinking critically about a situation, they start to get emotional. And when you are fearful, you are running primarily on emotion. And when you're running on emotion, that allows others to gain power in the situation. So there are forces out here, like I believe the mainstream media, that want to capitalize on this crisis by stoking fear. And they want to stoke fear because they are getting power as related to the situation. They get some sort of power as related to disseminating all of these reports out here and getting people anxious and nervous, because what they really want to do with these reports is not give us an objective analysis as related to the facts. What they want to do is fearmonger, because they want to attach an emotional hose to the American public so that they can keep their eyes glued to their programs. And if they can keep their eyes glued to their programs, they can get more and more people to watch the train wreck that goes on. And that's something that they believe is going to be captivating for them. So, what they want to do is get people on board with this train wreck and get people watching this train wreck so that they can get these ratings, they can get these clicks, and they can get these views for their websites, for their TV shows. And they only report on the worst cases of the pandemic. And they do that, I believe, deliberately because what they want to do is incite fear in the public. And again, people who are fearful are easier to attach that emotional hose to and make codependent. So they want people to depend on their media so that they can continue watching their programs, and they want to keep people scared. And again, fear is a great way to control people because when people are fearful, they are emotional. And when people are emotional, they are people you can gain an advantage of over in a situation. So that's what I see the mainstream media trying to do is they're using the fear to go out here and get people emotional, and they want them to start acting out as related to their behavior. And again, what they want to do is see people getting anxious and nervous and starting to go out here and start panicking because panicking means that they have bought into their narrative. So when they see people out here panicking out here, that means that the media is very happy because they know they've gotten people to buy into their narrative. And what they want to do is stoke this fear and have people hurting and participating in behaviors where they can be the puppet masters. And when they're the puppet masters, they have you behaving the way they want you to do and you not in control of yourself. And one of the things that I saw when I was in the shop right on Bruckner Boulevard in the Bronx was that herd behavior in front of me. And then that's when I started to see that the panic was being induced by a lot of these reports in the media. And a lot of it, the panic was, again, not being assuaged by your political leaders or people in the media. They were looking to stoke the fires and escalate the panic. And when I was in the store, I was sitting there, it's like, you've got all these people panicking and anxious and nervous, and they're panic buying because there was nobody there to really go out of their way to give people solid, objective information about this virus. Instead, what we're getting is a lot of subjective information about the virus that is made to fit people's agendas, but not meant to give people facts that will help them get through the crisis. So I really have an issue with all of the fear mongering that is going on out here in this media because that fear mongering isn't really constructive. What they have people doing is, again, running on their emotions and not thinking critically. And in a crisis, you really want to be a critical thinker because critical thinkers, their minds are clear and they can think objectively about a situation and they can make choices that can benefit everyone. But when you're in your emotions, you wind up making decisions that don't benefit you. And in many cases, you become your own worst enemy. And I remember back when I was a kid in junior high school, and I was being bullied in junior high school. And a lot of times, because I didn't know about critical thinking, I would give people power in situations because I would wind up getting emotional. And when you wind up getting emotional, what happens is you're allowing the other person to dictate to you, and you are not in control of yourself. And when you do that, again, what happens is you become your own worst enemy, and you wind up making decisions that wind up hurting you because what happens is you wind up feeling and acting on your feelings, and you wind up letting that person gain the upper hand in the situation. And what I'm seeing with the American public is that they have really lost a lot of control, and we the people are allowing others to dictate to us instead of us trying to come together to dictate a solution to the problem. We are reacting, and that's something people do when they are filled with fear is that they react, but you cannot react in a situation like that. Yes, you may get scared or nervous in the beginning, but you have to get control over yourself. You have to get control over your feelings. And again, it's like David Carroll has said, you have to navigate through your emotions. And navigating through your emotions is where you are, while you have these feelings of fear, you don't act on those feelings of fear. What you do is, yes, you have those feelings, but you understand that if you act on those feelings, there are consequences to acting on those feelings, and that at the end of the day, you are the one that's going to lose. So that's something people aren't really thinking about because they have bought into these media narratives as related to fear. And because they've bought into these media narratives as related to fear, again, this is what's stirring so much of the anxiety and the panic. And again, when you have panicked people, that's not a good thing you want with your masses out here is people being panicked because a panicked group, there are what these people believe are advantages to it, but I understand that there are also disadvantages to it. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute because when you have, again, panicked people, that you might have them herded for a moment, but eventually you are going to wind up losing control. And that's what many in the media aren't really thinking about critically when they go out here and continue to make all of these reports with these half truths and these half facts and this information that really is not objectively and presented in a balanced perspective. When they go out here and participate in sensationalizing things, they don't understand that yes, you've got people herded up and you've got them anxious, and that's going to be a short-term thing, but long-term you don't want to have people being filled with fear because they become harder and harder to control. Because one of the dangerous things about an emotional person is that they aren't somebody who you can predict what they're going to do. And when somebody is in their feelings and they are just simmering and boiling for a long time, there's a huge chance that you're going to have an explosion. And that's not something you want to have going on. And that's something that I see that's being manifested by all of this concentration of fear throughout your mainstream media and with many of your politicians. Now, many of your politicians are also going out here and they are fear mongering and they are escalating things because they are not really thinking critically about their actions, nor are they thinking about their words. Now, some of these people say they want to go out here and, flatten this curve, but the approaches that they are using, they are participating in actions that are very detrimental to everyone's health and safety. Now, again, a lot of them say they want to flatten this curve as related to this virus. But again, I look at many of their actions and see how they are counterproductive because the approaches that they're using, they're not, as I see it, again, productive. Like things like I see releasing all of the inmates out of the jails, that does not help with public safety because when you release all the inmates out here, that puts a lot of populations at risk. And a lot of people, they're sitting there talking about things like opening up these stores at early hours to let the senior citizens go out here. But what you're doing that's counterproductive is letting all of these inmates out of the jails. And that's going to lead to many of these senior citizens being preyed upon by these predators. So they're not really thinking critically about the public safety by going out here and releasing the prisoners. They're just thinking, oh, we're going to let them out in order to deal with things. But again, if this prisoner is inside of the Rikers or someplace, what happens is that we know that they're secure, and if they are infected, we can deal with them in the infirmary. So if he's out on the street and he's got this thing going on, what happens is he's not only a threat by committing crimes, but he's also spreading more disease. So that's why I say it's not a good critical or tactical decision to release these inmates, because they are going to do more damage on the outside. But if you were to contain them on the inside, Brother Tennessee, several states are talking about releasing inmates here in New York and many others. And again, I see it as part of escalating things as related to the fear mongering. And again, you really don't want to be releasing inmates during a pandemic, because it's just not a good situation to do, especially when your police, your firemen, and your first responders are quite busy. Moreover, it's not a good thing to do when you go out here and say, in some states, oh, you're not going to arrest anyone for misdemeanor crimes. So you're doing this, and then retailers are out here and going out here and talking about having these early hours for seniors. And all you're doing is creating a situation where these predators are going to target our elderly, and it's just not a good situation. Again, no critical thinking as related to the decision, and no critical thinking about the long-term consequences or decisions. I'm glad I could help you, Internal Life, for whatever I did. I always try to help my viewers out here. They have anything that they need, they send me an email. I'll answer their emails and try to help as much as I can. So I do that for many of my viewers, and I'm glad I could help you. I'm glad to see you here, Soul Provider. We had talked in several streams before, and hope to do it again this year later on. But when I look at, again, these decisions, again, they coming from emotions, and they're not really coming from a place of critical thinking. Trex Manifest, I heard about that, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. And again, that's all about the fear mongering. And that's something that I also had an issue with your Gavin Newsom when he talked about the martial law. And again, people from Washington had to sit down and talk to him and tell him to watch the words he was using, because they know how tense these situations are. They know how anxious people are. And when you make statements like that, what happens is that the populace, the herd, goes from following the lead to becoming anxious and panicky. And again, they're already starting to panic with the panic buying, which is just them looking to get some sort of sense of security about things. And that's what all the toilet paper buying and all the pasta buying and all the canned goods buying is about. It's about getting that sense of security. And that sense of security is because there is no real leadership on the federal level, the state level, or the local level, because no one is really focused on assuaging the public that there is going to be an effort to solve the problem. And it's all about keeping people afraid. But again, when you keep people afraid and you have a herd that is anxious, nervous, and tense, again, that's not really a situation anybody really wants to have, is a herd that is filled with fear, tense, and anxious, because all it takes is, sadly, one thing to set things off. And if it gets set off, you're going to lose all of the control. And that's why the fear mongering was never a smart thing to do in the first place, because it creates a powder keg. And again, when you have a powder keg, you're just going to have something that's going to explode. So a lot of these people, they're thinking that, oh, we're going to stoke all this fear, and it's going to be something positive coming out of it, that they're going to get some sort of codependent relationship, some sort of codependent control. But what happens is that you wind up in a situation where people just wind up blowing up, because when people are afraid, they want to survive. And when you have people in that fight or flight situation, that's not a place you want to put people in. Again, when I look at it, there's a lot of people looking to get this fear going on, but they don't really know what they're doing. They don't understand that fear is not something you want to get people buying into, because again, when you get people buying into fear, you're just it's just not something that's going to end in a positive fashion. You really don't want to get people filled with fear. Now, there are people, again, in your politics who want to stoke these fears because they believe they're going to get some sort of advantage. And I don't think that's one of the smartest things they've ever done, because your attempts to try to demonize whatever political party you have an issue with, this is not the way to do things, because that fear is not something you want to get people, you know, riled up on, because you may not get to November if you keep pushing buttons, if you keep getting people nervous. I mean, this may not go the way you expect, because again, a fearful person, there is no way of predicting what they may do, because when a person is in an irrational mind, what they do is unpredictable. So fear mongering, as I see it, the media, they're still continuing to do it. They're still trying to escalate things. And again, I really see where there needs to be a de-escalation as related to all of this fear mongering by your mainstream media, your politicians, and many in the business sectors. I'd see that there needs to be, all this fear mongering, it really needs to be ratcheted down, because again, a tense populace is not a good thing in the long term, because the more antsy people get as the crisis goes on longer, the more you have, again, that powder keg and a ticking time bomb. Good critical question, Richard Copeland. Should countries around the world stop trading with China? I believe that they are going to really change the way they do business with China after this, because your China maliciously, willfully, and intentionally buried this crisis, and they harmed everybody's business. And most people now are seeing that they had become too dependent on China's low cost labor and its imports, because it's dangerous for them to have control over so many industries. So I believe a lot of countries are going to stop trading with China, and what's going to happen is a lot of these countries are going to start taking their production in-house. So that's what I see is going to be a significant change as related to, global economics. Your China is going to be, it's going to go from a superpower to a has-been, because people don't trust them, they don't trust their policies, and their leadership took the beta position instead of the alpha position as related to a crisis. So instead of acknowledging a problem, what they did was bury a problem, something a beta male would do, and they hoped that by burying the problem would go away. Hey, Chris. Chris Brown is the creator of Omega Black, some fun action-packed manga, and it's some great reading for you to enjoy while you are at home. And he has he has Omega Black on Amazon, and he has it on Comixology. So if you want to pick up some awesome black manga, you can head over and pick up Chris's Omega Black. And while you're on Amazon, you can pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, like John Haynes' The Man with Nothing to Lose. This book is now available on Kindle Unlimited. And if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you can read it for free. And I have ISIS, the Main Event, available for pre-order. And in this one, The Goddess Next Door takes on the beast from the bowels inside of the steel cage. So you can pick this one up on Amazon on April 6th, right around the time of WrestleMania. And This one will also be available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you can read it for free. I'm going to do some more book promotion a little later on in the show. But WHO, they also were being funded by China. So Sammy 701 makes a good point, but they were funded by China. And again, that's why we didn't really see them really making any sort of response because they were bought and paid for. But their beta male response has showed the world that they are not really somebody you want to do business with, and that you really, America especially, needs to start bringing its factories back and bringing work back to Americans because the price of cheap labor has cost people their health and it has cost people their lives all over the world because some leaders were afraid of losing face, but a true leader isn't afraid of acknowledging a problem. That's what leadership is all about, is you have to take responsibility in a crisis. You have to take responsibility over a problem. And part of working towards the solution is acknowledging the problem. So that's something we're not really seeing as related to this crisis because everybody is trying to play on the fears of the masses in order to gain these advantages as related to either the upcoming election or to gain an advantage as related to controlling the way the population thinks. So there's a lot of disingenuous people out here stoking fear, and they're stoking fear because they don't really want to be honest and they don't want to take an honest work towards a constructive solution. And that's not something a person who has faith does. And a person who has faith is uses a completely different approach. Again, a person with faith trusts in God, and they trust in God because they know that God will deliver them during a time of trouble. And if they come to Him honestly and with their heart, they're going to get to the solution to their problems because the only way to overcome a problem is with faith in the Most High and not with fear. So when you go out here and you have faith, you are trusting in God to help you solve the problem. And you want to solve the problem because you care about the people. It is not about your feelings about whatever person you have an issue with. Like some people, they have these issues with Donald Trump being president of the United States. So they want to slant their coverage to make him look like a bad guy. And I see that as something that is extremely egregious because this crisis isn't about Donald Trump. This crisis is really about getting American people better, getting American people in a place where they can get back to their normal lives and get the American people back to a point where they can function again. And I don't see many of the people in the mainstream media and the politicians working towards getting people better. I see them trying to sway public opinion so that they can side with another's opinion from one side of a political aisle. And that to me is not constructive. I mean, I'd like to see a lot more objectivity because when you're objective, you are about leading the people towards giving them the very best of what they need and getting them to that point of security. And that's not something I'm seeing because our leadership is insecure. And because our leadership is insecure about losing its power, that's why we have gotten this really fear-based reaction as related to things, because there's a big difference between a person who reacts and a person who responds. Again, a person who reacts is allowing others to have control in a situation. They are giving away their power. and they are giving away their power because they are afraid of the unknown. Whereas a person who responds, yes, they know that this is the unknown, but they understand they have to maintain control of themselves, because if they don't maintain control of themselves, they're not going to get control in the situation. And if they can't get control in the situation, what's going to happen is they are going to wind up losing to whoever is going to challenge them. So the person who has faith understands, again, that they cannot act on their fear. They have to have faith, and they have to approach a situation from a responsive way. I mean, Jesus responded to many of the people who challenged him, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because he was not afraid of them. And he had faith in the Most High God to deliver him from any situation, even up to and including his death on the cross. So he had faith all the way to the end. And we have to have that same type of faith that we can overcome in situations. But I don't see our leadership trying to teach people to have that kind of faith, because they want to be able to have control over people through fear. And again, when you're trying to control something, what happens is you're going to wind up out of control, because the more you try to control people, the more you try to put a grip on people, what happens is they start pushing out of your grip because they start panicking. And when they start panicking, that's when you lose total control. And this is something that happens to a lot of the beta males when they get out here and they get a girlfriend. They start trying to control her. They start trying to put the vice grip on. Then they wind up losing. And again, this is what people do because they are filled with fear, and they fear losing their power. They fear losing their advantage. They fear losing their leverage. And they think that they have power because they've got this leverage. But again, the fear is the thing that makes them participate in actions that practically cost them everything. And when I look at the media and I look at some of these politicians, they're trying to get control through fear. And when you're trying to get control through fear, you're going to lose everything. And that's why, again, you have to have faith, because when you have faith, what happens is you are trusting in God to keep things in control. You're trusting in God to keep things in order. And when the Most High has everything in order, it's going to be set right. So you're not trusting in yourself to keep things under control. You're trusting in God to keep things in control. And that's something I'm not seeing being done with this crisis. All I see is more and more attempts to, gain more and more control. Well, many of these politicians playing a game of top that with how many restrictions they can put on people, trying to put more and more of a grip on people in an effort to, some talk about, flattening the curve. But what may happen is you're going to get an explosion. And you have to be really careful about how you do things, because America is not communist China. Communist China is a completely different country, and there's a completely different set of rules. And a lot of these politicians, they're not really thinking critically about how we're two different countries, and they're trying to use the same type of rules to try to control this so-called pandemic. But they don't understand that there's more to lose, because, again, when you have an anxious and panicked people, that's when you have this real powder keg. And instead of there being a group of people trying to get through a crisis, you wind up with people who are angry about other things. And when you have guys like Gavin Newsom, saying words like martial law, it stokes a spark on something that could really start a flame. So now I know, Luciano, you haven't been here in a while, but I'm talking about faith or fear. So those type of statements, again, that's why you have people in the federal government telling Gavin Newsom to watch his words, because saying things like martial law makes people who are already nervous and anxious, it makes them lose it. So you really don't want to be saying things like that, because if you make a statement like that, they're going to really, the herded panic is going to really turn into that fire, and it's going to explode, and you're going to have a worse situation than you would if you just let things go. That's why sometimes the best response is no response, because sometimes you just have to measure things before you respond. Because if you react to things, what happens is people just they wind up losing control, and you wind up losing control over everything that you tried to really get control of. These are all things they're not really thinking about, because everybody is running on fear. And I remember today watching Bill de Blasio, and he's a guy who really is filled with fear. I mean, he was all emotional, talking about how Donald Trump needed to bring this hospital ship there, and he started using profanity. And one of the things he did, again, getting emotional like that, showed how he wasn't in control over himself, and how he was losing control as related to the situation. So he was starting to let his fear overtake him, and that's not really a good sign of a good leader. If you have a guy who is letting his fear, get to him, and he's getting emotional in the middle of a crisis, it's not a good thing. I mean, because when you're afraid like that, again, he's showing that he's not really a strong leader. Because when I listened to him in that conference, I was like, doesn't he understand that just because Donald Trump announced that the ship was coming, there are logistics that's related to getting it here? I mean, an announcement of a hospital ship coming means that I have to get the troops on that ship ready. I have to get those doctors ready. And it's going to take several days from it to get from the port that it's at to the port in New York City. So there's logistics involved in getting a ship that large to the city. So he's sitting there getting angry, talking about Donald Trump needs to send the army in, again, taking a personal jab at Donald Trump, not understanding that he's making himself look weak, and he's not only making the situation that's already bad worse, he's also showing that there are cracks as related to the leadership structure. So there are different things that are out here. It's going to take some logistics to get it done, and nobody's really thinking about the logistics, because everybody is caught up in fear and nobody's thinking critically. And that's why you need good leadership, because you need somebody to go out here and talk about thinking things through, getting people to understand that it takes time to get things done, and taking time to get people on the same page. And that's another big problem with fear mongers, is they don't want everybody to be on the same page. And I'm going to leave a link to the new John Haynes book. So if you want to pick up John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, with the Mike Williams cover, you can pick it up now, because I have the link in the chat. But when you have people who are afraid, what is happening is that it really trickles into you're a bad leader, you're a weak leader. You don't know how to get everybody on the same page. And that's something that when you have people who are afraid, they're just all over the place. Everybody's doing their own thing. Thank you, Rebel Against Defeat, for the kind words about the book. I got a video review from one of the brothers out here that said really positive things about John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose. So you got to go get this one. I really put a lot of heart into this one. and you have to get it. But when you have again, when you have everybody fragmented and everybody's doing their own thing, doing their own different things, that's not a really good thing as related to a crisis. In a crisis, a leader wants everybody on the same page. And the reason why they want everybody on the same page is because you don't want to have people out here, participating in actions that are counterproductive, like all of these people from the jails being released, because it creates a situation where what happens is you're going to have all of these older people being targeted because there's no police and fire and everybody else is busy trying to deal with the crisis, but people's public safety is being put at risk. So you really want everybody on the same page. And again, Patrick makes a good point. Patrick Smith makes a good point that, yeah, they are behind all this fear. And again, we're not getting that objective journalism because they're not on the same page with the president, and the local politicians aren't on the same page with the president. And that's going to make things not really work constructively as I see it, because one side wants to make people fearful because they want to blame the other side, and that doesn't really help the American people. Glad to see you here, Rob IS. A lot of the Bronx store shelves lift every voice there. Some of them are empty, some of them are not. It just depends. But again, when I look at it again, that's because of the fear being induced by the media. Because from what I've been seeing, again, the trucks come in, but because people are so panicked, they keep buying more. And again, that's all related to people going out here and looking to gain advantages as related to keeping people scared instead of trying to get all of the American people on the same page. Because if you get everybody on the same page, then what happens is you don't have people panic buying. Instead, you have people going out here and they're taking their time to do things like working on themselves, working on building different things, working on developing different things, and taking this time for themselves. Instead, when you have people who are afraid, what happens is they start hoarding and they start being anxious. And again, that's not a good situation to get people into. You really don't want to have people scared, like they have right now, because that situation is going to lead to a lot of anxiety. And again, you don't want anxious people, because anxious people eventually are going to turn into angry people. Now, I don't know much about 5G Rebel Against Defeat, but I'm not really a fan of it because I already think we have enough with 4G. But it's like these greedy companies that just keep building more and more bandwidth. I mean, they haven't learned their lesson from the HD debacle of 2009, because thanks to the HD debacle, that's why Hollywood is in decline, because people migrated to the internet, and if they keep doing things, they're just going to make things worse for themselves. So they don't see what they're doing with this technology. They just keep pushing to pass these limits, but they don't understand that maybe it's time to chill. And that's something that I really believe is something people really need to do as related to the mainstream media and these local politicians, is they really need to chill. They really need to take a minute to back up and think critically, because a lot of the stuff they are doing isn't helping those who are already sick. And when you, like Ringo said in one of his live streams, when you have people who are filled with fear and anxiety, it leaves them open to become vulnerable to getting illnesses. Because I know myself, being somebody who has anxiety, how you can leave yourself wide open by being filled with fear. And again, it's not a good state to be in, to be filled with fear, because that leaves you vulnerable, it leaves you wide open. And that's the thing that is the most dangerous thing about everything. It's not really the virus that's, as I see it, as dangerous. I see it as the fear being more dangerous than the virus, because when people are afraid, it makes them behave in extremely dangerous ways where they not only become harmful to others, but they also become harmful to themselves. So, a person who is afraid, what makes them dangerous is that they are not only dangerous to others, but they're dangerous to themselves because they may react in ways where they wind up putting others in harm's way, or even worse, they may go out here and participate in behaviors that may possibly harm others. So that's why you don't want to stoke fear and anxiety in people, especially in large populations, because when you stoke fear and anxiety in people, it is a recipe for disaster. And I see our mainstream media, they're looking at trying to report on body counts, they're looking to report on numbers of cases, and they want to keep people watching the train wreck, but they don't really want to focus on giving us a balanced picture to give people hope. Because as I see it, I have not seen many reports on these mainstream media platforms talking about recovery, and that's really troubling to me, because you really do need to have people talking about recovery, because when you have people talking about recovery, that helps build faith. And when you're building faith, again, you're building confidence in people so they won't be afraid. So that's something that the mainstream media isn't focusing on, because they want to keep the circus going. And some of them want to keep the circus going because a lot of them have issues with your Donald Trump. Now, I have my issues with Donald Trump, and I don't believe he's qualified to be a president, but he's the president that the American people picked, and he's the one who has been put in charge of the country. And you have to accept who was picked. And sadly, because some people are, um, I'm not scared to lift every voice. I have faith in the Most High living God, and I trust in the living God to keep us all. And again, that's why I'm giving this live stream, because it's all about trying to teach about faith, because faith is the opposite of fear. And it's when you have faith, you're not afraid of anything, because people who have faith, they have confidence in God that they will deliver them, and they have confidence that they can get through anything with the help of the Most High God. So they're not living in a world of fear. There's, as I see it, people, they are feeling some dread and anxiety, but again, that's all because of the fear mongering. But we need to start building faith in our country, and we need to start building faith overall. Now, that's the big problem with everyone, because nobody is thinking from a faith-based platform or faith-based direction. Everything is fear. And again, fear is getting people to react to things. And when you react, you are allowing the devil to gain control. When you react, the devil gets power. And when he gets power, what he wants to do is get you to react to him. And when you react, you do things that harm yourself. And that's something people aren't really thinking critically about, because what they want to do is get you scared. This media, many of these local they just want to get everybody so scared that all they do is sit there and keep reacting to these reports of body counts, these reports of number of cases, these reports of things closing, these reports of seeing things like National Guard. They want you to get so terrified that you practically are in total anxiety, and that's not a place you want to be. I mean, I was there when I was a teenager, out with this bullying, and it wasn't a good place, because again, you're a place where you just wind up falling completely apart. And again, when you wind up falling completely apart, you wind up doing things that will be destructive, not only to yourself, but to others. And this is not something I think people are thinking about, because they believe they've got the upper hand and they think they can keep stirring this pot. Thank you, Realist, for the super chat. Um, I'm glad I could help you with my with this live stream, because I've heard about all of these crazy conspiracy theories, and it makes people very nervous. And again, that's why we need leadership in this crisis, because leadership is something that can assuage a lot of the fears out there and make people feel comfortable about a situation. Because when you have people with these conspiracy theories talking about martial law, talking about, all of these different things, a lot of Bronx people, they're not really scared, because black people, and black people primarily, we've already been through this all the time. It's like Mr. Superboy was saying in his video, we've been living with this type of situation for years now. Your whites and your Asians, they're used to having all of this freedom, and them having restrictions on their freedom. That's something that they're not used to. But black people, we've been living like this ever since we were born. I mean, we have to deal with these unwritten social rules that restrict our freedom every day. So we already know that we have to be on point out here, because there's danger all around us. So we know it's already dangerous out here for us. So I have no idea how long the lockdown will last in that, but I just see people trying to manipulate it to gain some sort of political advantage. And I find that to be really unethical, because you're not going to gain any sort of advantage. What you're going to do is create this powder keg, because over time, again, fear turns to anger, and anger turns into rage. Because that's one of the things I talk about in the man crisis with these beta males. A lot of them, they are raised primarily to be afraid. And because they've learned that culture of fear, what happens is those beta males, they wind up going from being fearful to angry to being enraged. And when people are enraged, that's a very dangerous situation. So these people who are trying to manipulate things, they're not really thinking about the bigger picture. And again, they're all about the fear, but they're not thinking about critically about what the consequences of fear mongering are. So what they want to do is continue to talk about the horrors, but they don't want to give people hope. And that's one of the most important things you want to do as a leader, is give people that hope, because where there is hope, you then have people who are more focused on the solution. And being focused on the solution means they have something to be faithful to, and they have a goal to work towards. And that's what part of faith is that you're believing in what you don't see. And you want people to be having that faith, because when they have that faith, they have something to hope for in the future. And that's something that most people aren't really focusing on, because they are so caught up in the power they have with fear. But again, that power, while you're trying to put the vice grip on people with that power, what happens is they wind up fighting to get out of that power, and they wind up pushing back against that power. And again, in a country where you have people who are used to being free and having free will, what's going to happen is you may get a major pushback if things go on too long. So a lot of these guys, they're not really thinking critically, because all they're thinking about is, I've got this power, I've got this power, because that's what beta males do. They think, I've got this power, I've got this power. And what happens is people push back against their power, and that's when they lose everything. So there's a fine line, and a lot of people aren't really thinking about that fine line, because they are caught up in the power they have with the fear they're inducing. But again, when you have people like this, it's never a good situation to be in. So A lot of guys are they're just thinking, oh, we've got this power with our media. We're getting people scared. We've got these politicians who are thinking, we've got these people scared. We're in charge. We have leverage. We're on top. But it's not a good situation. And again, they're doing this all because they have these personal issues with a president. But that again shows that the House is divided. You want a House that is together and a House that is standing together, because when you have a House that is standing together with faith, then everybody is on the same page, everybody is working towards the same goals, and everybody is truly in it together. And that's why faith is important, because again, faith is the opposite of fear. Trusting in the Most High God is the opposite of looking at the world. And when you're looking at the Most High God and looking for Him to give you deliverance, then you are going to overcome whatever the enemy throws at you. And that's not something I'm seeing people focusing on right now. I mean, we really need to see more of a focus on people, getting that whole, hearing the stories from people who have overcome this virus. I mean, I would like to see your mainstream media focusing on those stories rather than talking about, these numbers, and how bad it's going to be. And you have people like your Gavin Newsom, who was talking about 60% of California's population and all these projections. And again, this is something that is just, again, fanning the flames and fanning the fear. And that's not something you want. Some of these guys say they want to be realistic, but that's just fanning the flames. And you don't want to fan flames when people are already nervous, because instead of you, again, having to deal with a virus, you're going to be dealing with very, very tense people who are going to explode, and you're going to be dealing with a worse situation overall, because the longer things go, the worse things are going to get if you have people filled with fear. But if you have them filled with faith and hope, then you're going to have a way better situation, and you're going to have people who are going to be on your side working towards the goal of getting things better, instead of worrying about how much worse things are going to be. So that's why it pays to keep people positive, keep people optimistic, and keep people focused on faith in God and faith overall, because again, it's that faith that will help us all overcome fear. And again, when I look at this mainstream media and some of these local politicians, the way they are talking is, it's just stoking these fires. It's just escalating things, and escalating things in a non-constructive manner, because yes, you want to talk about dealing with this crisis in a constructive manner, but you don't want to get people so terrified that they wind up becoming their own worst enemies, and they wind up participating in behaviors that are destructive. And that's what a good leader does. He understands that he has to look at that situation objectively, and he has to go out here, and she has to go out here and understand that yes, there are things that are bad. Yes, there are things that we have issues with, but the only way we're going to overcome these issues is if we are all working together on the same page, and we're all doing our part towards working towards the same goals. And when I look at America's leadership, I see 50 different people on 50 different pages, and we really need leadership that will bring us together on one page, and we need to really get all of this information out here presented in a constructive manner, instead of having one guy talk about 18 months, one guy talking about 6 months, one guy talking about one date, one guy. We need consistent one flow of information, and we need a consistent plan And we're not getting that because we have 50 different people doing 50 different things and nobody's on the same page. And that's the big problem as I see it, with our leadership, is that everybody is so caught up in their feelings and trying to manipulate the feelings of the American public. They want people to be afraid and they want people to be filled with this fear. Unfortunately, it's the fear that I believe will be the thing that will be more destructive to America than your coronavirus, because the fear is what is making people participate in these really, as I see it, twisted behaviors like the hoarding, like the panic buying. And again, when you have a media stoking fires because they want to get ratings and they like people watching train wreck TV, like people fighting in stores and people out here getting heated, what they're trying to do is stoke these flames. And that's something that really there needs to be some pushback on, because when I look at your American media, they are just really stoking these flames to get people heated because they want to see some sort of carnage go on in the street. And some of them want to blame that carnage on the president of the United States because they have a personal issue with him. But as I see it, you don't really want that type of thing to go on no matter who is in the White House, because once you let a monster out of the cage, what happens is it's hard to get the monster back in the cage. And that's something many of the fear mongers aren't really thinking about, because you don't know what people are capable of when you fill them with fear. People are capable of all sorts of evil when they are afraid, because again, fear is just the foundation of anger. And when that anger has turned into rage, you just don't want to start taking people down that road. And that's why, again, I say your local politicians and your mainstream media really need to chill out on all of the fear mongering, and they really need to start putting together more objective journalism so that people can get the information that they need to weather this crisis, set a course for this crisis, and move their lives forward in a constructive manner. And while I know it's a hard time, I know many people are out of work. I've been out of work myself for, again, over a decade from the last recession, and I never got another job after it. I know how hard it is out here for a lot of people. And again, I know that it's a very tense and anxious time. And for everyone out here. And again, I know how hard it is because I went through the Great Recession and I lost my job back in 2008. And I know how hard it is for a lot of people out here because I've lived through it, and I've lived through, again, long-term periods of unemployment. So I know there's a lot of hardships for a lot of people out here. But there is still hope. And again, you cannot let fear, overtake you. You have to have faith, because faith is the only thing that will allow you to be delivered. The only thing that's going to help you is faith in the Most High Living God, because when there is no way in the eyes of man, he will always give you a way. So that's something that you need to focus on. We're not really getting that focus on having faith. All we're getting, again, is fear. And again, fear is never something you want to start pushing people towards, because, yeah, you may get people emotional and riled up, but you don't know what those emotions will make a person do, because they're not thinking anymore. They're feeling. And when people are feeling, that's when they become extremely dangerous. And that's something, again, many of these people in the mainstream media and some of these politicians aren't really thinking about, some of these business owners aren't thinking about, is, again, you're thinking that you're the lion roaming around in the street like the devil. But what happens is you wind up running into a man with a spear, and he may wind up taking you out. Why are the political extremists, such as racists, feminists, SJWs, they need fear because that's how they control people. That's how they get people to buy into their narrative. Thank you, Lino 5922002 for the super chat. I really appreciate it. But Luciano, what happens is that political extremists need fear because if you start to use logic and reason to challenge their ideologies, you start seeing the flaws in their ideologies, and that's how you can tear them apart. So they need to get you emotional so that they can control you. And what happens is they can use that emotion to manipulate you to react to them and not go out here and respond. Because when you start thinking critically about your feminists, your SJWs, your political extremists, and the fear that they're fear mongering that they do, you start to see the holes in a lot of their rhetoric. And once you start seeing the holes in their rhetoric, you realize how full of it these people are. And when you realize how full of it they are, you realize they're not about creating any sort of solution. It's just all about them hustling. Thank you, Lino 5922002. I'm glad you've been enjoying the work that I do, like my books and my videos since 2015. I mean, I go out of my way to put together, really quality work out here for everyone and share with everyone. And I'm glad to see you as part of my stream. T-Mac, I'm glad you're enjoying this live stream because I wanted to do this one because I really wanted to help people, overcome all of this fear out here because this fear, it's really destructive. And when you have, again, I've lived through being fearful. I've lived with social anxiety all my life, and I know how dangerous fear is. And when I see irresponsible people in the mainstream media, irresponsible local and state politicians and government and federal politicians stimulating fear, it really, I know how dangerous it is because I know from my own personal life experience how dangerous it is to be in a state of fear. And I know that when you make the American people their own worst enemy, they aren't going to make America a great country by rising up to the occasion. What they're going to do is turn into the type of people who create civil wars. And again, the mainstream media thinks that they want this type of thing until they get it. And that's not something I see as constructive. I mean, you already have a crisis right now, and what they're doing is escalating things to make the crisis worse. And I may check out David Icks later on, but I just see them doing things because they want to gain these advantages, and then what they're going to do is lose in the long term because they're focused on the short term of trying to make the president they don't like look bad. And I see it as when you have a crisis like this is not about making a president look bad. This is about all of the American people rising to the occasion. And with all of the American people, I'm doing as best I can, Rudy Dog. I'm all right. God has me, but you want to have people rising to the occasion and doing their best, because when people are rising to the occasion and doing their best, again, they are focused on their faith and they're focused on hope, and they're focusing on the hope of a better day. That's what they're focusing on. But when you have people, again, trying to keep the fear going, I've seen some toilet paper here and there in supermarkets. Yeah, lift every voice. I've seen it, and I've seen orders for you want people again focused on hope, and that's something we didn't get again with Barack Obama, and we're not getting it with the mainstream media right now. We're not getting any focus on hope. We're getting focus on fear. And I really believe, again, we need some pushback on this mainstream media because they are just, fanning these flames, looking to sensationalize things. And that's one thing I agree with President Trump when he called that guy out at that news conference today when he talked about any words of hope. He was being passive aggressive in trying to passively ask the question about hope, but then aggressively looking to attack your Donald Trump because many in the mainstream media have an issue with him. And again, I can put my issues aside with your Donald Trump, even though I'm not a big fan of his presidency. I understand that he is the leader you chose, and you have to support that leader because you, the people, chose him. And you may not agree with him as a person, but you have to have the character to be able to work with him in a time of crisis. That's something that I'm not seeing people having in this country. They're just all about, again, their feelings, but they're not really having faith as related to working towards the ultimate goal, which is a healthy America and a healthy world. And they're not really thinking about that because, again, they are so in their emotions because people want to manipulate them based on fear. People want them to be afraid. They want them to be in a state of this fear. But again, you don't want to be in fear because fear is where you have no power. And again, when people feel powerless, that's when they want to fight back and get their power. Now, we saw that trying to get their power by people buying these toilet paper and hoarding. That's one way of people trying to get security blankets, but eventually, over time, that's just not going to be enough for people because when you are afraid, the security blanket doesn't do much for people later on. And that's when, again, the frustration turns into anger and the anger turns into rage. And that's, again, not a trajectory people are thinking about because, again, when you are a fearmonger, you're only thinking about the short term, those clicks on your website, getting those million hits on your website, like many of these places like Washington Post and many of these other newspapers or these news networks which are getting big ratings. They're thinking about the short term, but I'm thinking about the long term as related to the values of the country, the overall mental health of the country, the overall direction of the country. Because from what I've seen for the last maybe 16 years, there really has not been a focus on setting a direction from the country by any of the leaders because they're all jockeying to grab power, but they're not thinking about, setting a direction because that's how you get power. Because when you have faith in achieving something larger, then you can build towards that larger goal. And when you get people on the same page, they can all work towards that same goal. But when you are divided, what happens is that's a good point, T-Mac. All these, no matter what they're doing, yeah, they're trying to get people full the money. They're trying to. It's going to go back to the stores because even if they give people the $1,200, they think the money's going to go back. But the whole thing is, nobody is focused on, again, the long term. Everybody's just thinking, oh, we gave them some money, but I look at that as another, really, it's a okay decision to give people money, but with most of the businesses closed, where are they going to spend the money? How are they going to stimulate the economy outside of shopping at .coms, which are already starting to become overwhelmed by all of the orders and maybe local restaurants? There's not many places for people to go. And again, everybody's thinking short term, but nobody's thinking long term because long term thinkers, they come from a faith-based perspective, whereas short-term thinkers come from a fear-based perspective. And a short-term thinker, all they're thinking about is the right now. But a person who is a long-term thinker, they're thinking about the later on because they trust in God to give them something later on, like Abraham, when he trusted in God and he made him the father of all the nations. He trusted in him in the long term because he focused on what God had for him later on. Now, people like his wife wanted him to focus on the short term, and that's how we got Ishmael. but in the long term, he was focused on doing God's work on earth. So that's something people aren't really thinking about because they're just thinking, I want to get it now. I want to get this $1,200 now, but we need to think about the later. And people really aren't thinking about the later. I did 2 videos on the New Warriors, Patrick. I talked about, yeah, that non-binary snowflake, which is, again, that was one of the most racist things I ever saw, because what they do is they passively will give you a non-binary character, but they will make the character black so that they can asexualize that black character so that they won't appear as attractive as the white characters in comparison. So it's basically emasculating or asexualizing a black character so that you can have a black person there, but they are basically a weak, ineffective person. They're basically like a child to all of the other people, and that's not something you want to promote if you're promoting so-called positivity. I mean, that's one of the things I had an issue with that New Warriors relaunch, because they don't. Seems like Marvel doesn't want to give you a strong masculine image of a black man like I have here on the cover of John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, the regular cover, nor do they want to give you a masculine black man and a feminine black woman like I have on this variant cover by Josh Howard. It seems like they have an issue with that because many of the people who work at companies like Marvel, they're really insecure about images of black manhood and black womanhood. They really want to give you these neutered, emasculated images of black people because they are uncomfortable about the idea of black male leadership. They are uncomfortable with the idea of a black man having power. Because if you look at this book cover, here you have a black man using his power, and they are really uneasy about seeing an image of a black man having power and in control of himself and defending himself and protecting his woman. Because if you look at Mike Williams' image, there's a lot going on here. And you won't get this on a Marvel comic. You won't get this type of imagery that shows you this type of image. And an image like this, where you see the black man and the black woman standing together, ready to take on anything. They don't want you to see, these images of black masculinity and black manhood, because your SJW is afraid of those type of images, and they're afraid of having to compete with those type of images. They want these neutered images, and they don't want you to see, an ISIS, attractive black woman, even Umbutra, attractive black woman. These type of images, they make you think about yourself and see you value in yourself. They don't want you to see that. So that's why they'll give you a snowflake and a safe space, because like I said in the video, they want you to have a safe space. They don't want you to see, an attractive woman like an Eastine, a black woman who's very attractive, because they are, a lot of white women, they are very insecure about seeing slender, attractive black women. So that's why they will make a character like that Dora the Explorer type, the fat and I found Native American. I thought she was a black woman, and they'll put her on the team, and because they need her to be, the image that makes white people feel comfortable. They don't like the idea of, black women and black men being masculine, being feminine, because one of the great insecurities many of the racists have, like these SJWs have, is they have a great insecurity about having to deal with black male and black female sexuality, because if we are secure in our own sexuality, what happens is they cannot gain control over us and have us seeking validation of them. So that's something that they don't want us to see. That's why they'll go out here and make a book like A New Warriors and then talk about diversity. And that diversity, again, is not about showing how strong black people are. It's about showing how weak black people are, so that the white person can appear to be the one on top. And the great irony is that your New Warriors, when it was created, was having Night Thrasher, a black man, leading the team, but the white male writer who did this New Warriors, he really shows how insecure he is. Thank you, Patrick. I would love to do a Netflix series, but they haven't got in touch with me. I know a lot of them would probably make good Netflix series I have like a whole bunch of stuff that would, if you saw it on TV, it'd probably be 10 times better than it was in the book. But that's that's something that they don't like seeing. And again, they want to do these passive aggressive things to the black image because they are afraid of black masculinity. And that's what another thing that I see with this fear thing is that a lot of these people are afraid that these viruses aren't going to Africa for some reason, because when you look at the map, there's nothing there on Africa at all. And that has a lot of these white racists and these Asian racists upset, is not seeing anything on the African continent because they want something to be there, and they show again how fearful they are and how they want to fear monger by always talking about black people who have the virus and making media about them, but not really talking about, again, objectivity as related to hope, because it's all about fear for them, and it's all about fear mongering to get people scared and terrified to the point where they are running around with a chicken with its head cut off, panicking. And that's something that they don't want to, that's something that they want to see until the tables get turned. Yeah, Black Panther, I saw it on was it TNT a while back. And again, the gynocentrism came really through from the small amount I saw. I think it was Tuesday I watched Black Panther on there. Oh, that movie does not get better with age. And again, the Black Panther was neutered because they were insecure about the things. They were just really insecure. And I find it interesting, again, they want us. Yep. But everybody's about fear. And again, I look at fear as, again, it's never a good thing to have people afraid. And that's what the mainstream media, they love getting people afraid, because fear allows them to have control. It allows them to get ratings. It allows them to have eyeballs focused on them and attention on them. But again, you don't want a fear-based thing, because after a while, people get tired of looking at the train wreck and they want to clean up the train wreck and get things right, because eventually train wrecks, they may be entertaining for some, but eventually, if you keep that as the standard, then what happens is you wind up making things worse overall. So I think I touched on a lot of the points as related to fear in this stream, and I think I've touched upon a lot of stuff. So I see what they're doing. Again, it takes me back to what I had to deal with fear. And again, the only way to overcome fear is with faith. So I might do a live stream on the New Warriors maybe next week. I might start doing more streams, because sometimes you need, consistent content. But I wanted, because I did videos on it, but I may, really do a live stream on this New Warriors, and how these type of images, how they harm black people, because when you have these type of images out here, they're really negative, and people don't see how they're negative because people sell them as so-called diversity. And it's a passive aggressive thing that they're doing passively. Yes, they're giving you a character of color, like they say, but aggressively, they are attacking the black man and the black woman. So I see what they're doing, again, with the New Warriors. And again, that comes from the SJW's fear and insecurity about black manhood and black womanhood. They all passively talk about inclusion, but they, again, only want to include a certain type of black person. I'm gonna definitely just do a whole stream on the whole subject of that topic, because I don't want to, mar the message of this one, because the message of this one was supposed to be, about having faith and trusting in God and having that faith to overcome, things, because when you have people who are fear mongering, they have the devil. And yeah, I'm definitely going to do that one. JKM J87. I'm definitely going to do that one because I really believe that I can really go in depth on that one. So that one may be coming next week. And I may also do a golf live stream next week. It may be double live stream. So because I haven't done a golf live stream in a long time, and I know that my golf viewers and darkly inclined viewers, they really enjoy that content. So I definitely want to do one of those. I guess I'm looking for the right topic. Um, I'm pondering doing one about what parents need to know about the subculture, because I had a viewer come on, baby back come on a while back, and that was a topic that he got a lot out of it. But I really want to do the one about this new warriors and the efforts to, neuter the black image. I really want to do that one, but I really don't want to mess this one up, because this one was one I really wanted to do because I want everybody to stop being fearful, stop being in their feelings, and I want people to really focus on faith, because it's going to take faith to overcome things. I dealt with fear many years ago. I'm not afraid anymore. I trust in God to do things for me. I'm not paranoid because I understand what paranoia is. I understand what those things can do to you, and I can understand how dangerous it is. So the politicians, they are cowardly because they keep escalating things and they keep making things worse, because they're playing this game of top that, where they can see how many restrictions they can put on people. And they say they're doing it for safety, but it's not really safety. It's about fear, and it's about inducing more and more fear. And again, they want people to be afraid because they're afraid to be leaders, and they're afraid to take responsibility. And that's something that I have an issue with a lot of them, because they're escalating things and getting people scared because they think they can control people through the fear. But you're not going to control people. Again, once you start putting a grip on something, what happens is people push out of the grip, and that's where you have a powder keg situation. But beta males do that because they are insecure about getting their needs met. They're insecure about being in charge. I do believe that, yeah, the politicians are afraid to hold China accountable, but again, they have to be held accountable because it was their beta male response that led to everything. They looked to bury everything and hide everything because they were afraid of losing face. And again, their lack of faith is why everything is the way it is right now, not to mention them participating in these deviant behaviors like eating these unclean animals that the Most High told us not to eat, and them participating in a godless society. This is why they need to be held accountable, because if you did what you did, you need to be held responsible for what you did. And if you lose face, you lost face because of decisions you made, not because of what somebody else did. I mean, that's basically what the Chinese government needs to understand. Your people's efforts to make a smooth world caused chaos in the whole world. And because you wanted to not deal with the problems, the obstacles, and the issues, you wound up creating more problems, obstacles, and issues for everyone. So when I look at that, they need to be held accountable for it. And I believe that the Most High is going to hold them accountable for their deviancy with the judgment he's imposed on them. And I believe most of these corporations are going to start thinking twice about dealing with them, because they're the ones who cannot take responsibility. They cannot be trusted to take responsibility. And they may be forced to take their business elsewhere because the value of saving a few dollars is not as valuable as the lives of the Americans who go out here and buy their products. And if you wind up killing your customers, you're not going to wind up making most money as related to things. So I believe that American business, if they really cared about the American people long term, they're just going to start pulling their factories and their businesses out of China and bring them back to America because it's better for the American economy. And again, you cannot trust these individuals after they went out here and hid all of this information. So you can't trust somebody, then you can't work with them. So there's no, they're going to have to hold them accountable. And anybody who doesn't hold them accountable in America, that's somebody you can't trust as well. So I look at that situation again. And yeah, people need to be looking at China and looking to hold them accountable and demand that they get their act together. But that's what I think about, as related to that international situation. But when I think about Black people, again, I really want to help Black people and people in America, overcome fear because, again, as someone who's lived with fear, I know how dangerous it is. I know how it can make you emotional. It can make you act irrationally. And when you're filled with fear, you're out of control. And good point. I just have this one because it helps me when I'm talking. Sometimes I get, dry mouth and stuff like that. But Bella Chronicles. But what I want to do again is help people overcome this fear. And this is the type of talk your president should be giving to people. This is the talk your mayor should be giving to you. Your governor should be giving to you. It should be about helping you overcome fear, because when you overcome fear, you're in a place where you're looking towards the future. You're trusting in God to take you to that safe place, and you're trusting in God to deliver you. And that's what I would want to see people doing, is focusing on faith, focusing on the hope, focusing on those who have recovered, and focusing on moving to a better place. That's what I want to see people focused on, because when you're focused on the positive, you have something to work towards. And instead of you being filled with this fear and working against yourself, that's something that's not constructive. Again, I want to see people work focused on their futures, not focused on how bad things are. And I want to see people focused on, things getting better. So yeah, I think that's some way of trying to avoid holding them responsible, because that theory, as I see it, is again another deflection from holding them, from holding them accountable, because these people want to keep these covert contracts. They want to keep these, these factories going. They want to keep keeping that cheap labor, because if you hire an American, you're going to have to pay them $25 an hour and to work in a factory. Then they're so greedy that people aren't really thinking about, the bigger picture as related to things. But again, that's all about them and their fear of losing something by holding China accountable. But you have to have faith that things will change, because sometimes you have to not be afraid of having conflict, because in order to get to a solution, you have to go through conflict. And I believe that all of these people, again, they're running on fear. And again, you don't want to run on fear, because when you're running on fear, you're letting other people control you, and you're not letting God be in control, and you're not in control. You don't want to be in that situation where you're filled with fear, because a person who's filled with fear has no faith, and a person with no faith is someone who is going to eventually wind up becoming consumed by the enemy. I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I really want to thank everybody for coming out to the stream. And I really would like everybody to go out and pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct Imprint. I'm going to leave a link to my Amazon where you can pick up all of my books, like let's see what we got here. John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. You can pick this up on Amazon. John Haynes, Dark Succubus. John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, the Josh Howard variant. John Haynes, the Mike Williams cover, The Nothing Man with Nothing to Lose. ISIS, The Main Event, which is coming out on April 6th, but is available in paperback right now. Eastine Goddess of. And last year's, ISIS book, ISIS, All That Glitter. So you can pick up all of those books. A second. You can pick up all these books on Amazon.com in paperback. And if you really want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to the Cash App by clicking the link in the chat, or you can donate to the Patreon, which helps me pay for the covers of many of these books. This is how I pay artists with the Patreon. Thank you, Norris. I'm glad you did give your sister a copy of The Man Crisis. This is also available, and this book has transformed so many men's lives out here. And it's a book that you definitely, if you read it, it will really change your life. I'm glad you shared it with your sister so that she could share it with her son. And again, I have a lot of great books on Amazon, a lot of great positive Black fiction, a lot of great nonfiction like The Man Crisis and Stop Simping. And all those books, they have helped a lot of brothers out here and help people transform their lives. And if you want to, transform your life, you can pick up some of that great positive Black fiction. And I hope to be back next week with another live stream where I'll be talking about new warriors and why Black people need to control their own image. I hope you'll be there for that stream, and I'll announce that stream sometime next week. But I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. I hope you continue to have faith, because that's the only way we can overcome fear, and that's the only way we can stand in a crisis, because without the Most High, we're not going to overcome any crisis, and without the living God there for us to have faith in, we cannot overcome any force from the enemy. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream.